Welcome to this episode of Rules and Ramblings. Today we're doing part 2 of introducing every 40k tabletop faction. Today we're covering Chaos. I'm Maxen, and he's Nomad.
Hi, I'm 3 feet away from my monitor.
You're relaxed today, aren't you?
I'm so laid
Yeah,
back.
you're not leading today, you fucker.
I'm
Right.
so laid back right now.
Yeah, but since you're not leading today, what faction do you want to start with?
That's great, and I'll get to that in a second. But before, I want to lay down a couple of changes since last episode. So in our last episode, we tried to make a point of avoiding certain keywords and describing things in general terms of what these rules do. That got really tedious, and I don't want to do that anymore. So from this episode and the next episode, we're just going to talk about the rules as they are. If you don't know what they are, you can just look up the core rules. They're free online. But we will explain things here and there. But for certain general terms like lethal hits, we won't talk about that.
So what are we starting with?
What we want to start with, it would be too easy to do Chaos Space Marines.
Yeah, but also it's the base faction.
So that's why we're going to start with Chaos Space Marines. But the smart ones, we're going to start with K-Suns. Sorry, 1,000 Suns.
Well, technically it's the 1,000 Suns.
I don't care.
1,000 Suns.
There are only 1,000 of them.
Also, they were technically referred to affectionately as K-Suns.
Yeah, like I just said.
Nah, you said it weird.
I said K-Suns.
Nah, you said 1,000 Suns.
I said K-Suns and then 1,000
And then you said
Suns.
1K Suns.
No, I that's the other way around. The other way around.
Nah, I said technically they're called the 1,000 Suns.
Maybe we should have just done Chaos Space Marines.
How do we even start at K-Suns? They're weird.
I have words about another faction, but it's really good if we start with K-Suns, but it's all right. We'll do CSM first. So if you're here from our first part where we talked about Space Marines, you pretty much already get the gist. Chaos Space Marines are Space Marines, but Chaos.
But bad.
Pretty much every Space Marine unit, there is a Chaos Space Marine equivalence.
Yeah, so what are they called? The heavy weapons squad for Space Marines. What are they called? Devastator squads?
The Firstborn are Devastator squads, yeah, but they get really weird in Primaris.
Yeah, but Chaos Space Marines don't have Primaris yet. Oh yeah, I finished Gene Father. It was a good book.
That's nice.
But anyway, yeah, as we were saying, every Space Marine unit, or at least most of the more general ones, there is a Chaos Space Marine equivalent. So for Dreadnoughts, there's Hellbrutes, as well as several other demon engines. They get a little weird.
Yeah, pretty much just if you're playing Chaos Space Marines, you could take any Space Marine model and then just add spikes to it, and there's some Chaos model out there. This isn't a deep dive. However, one thing I will say about Chaos Space Marines is compared to regular Space Marines, you had the benefit of being able to flavor your army to whatever chapter or homebrew canon, whatever chapter you want, because they were so, I guess, flat. Chaos Space Marines are not that. There are a handful of warbands we won't be talking about, like Night Lords, Iron Warriors, etc. But the problem is the way Chaos Space Marines their models are designed, you're pretty much stuck to just playing Black Legion as far as how the models look. Because Black Legion has a lot of chaos and demon tainted stuff where other warbands don't do that. Not something super crazy, nothing that's going to make or break your decision to play this faction, just something to think about.
Well, to be fair, there are technically two main subtypes other than the Night Lords that do kind of get what Black Legion get, but to a lesser manner, where they focus more on one aspect. Word Bearers are more psychery, and they get or you bring a lot of psychers for them because they're kind of a theme thing. But then there's Iron Warriors, which bring a lot more vehicles or demon engines. But Black Legion's basically, it's like the Ultramarines of the Chaos Space Marines. Mauled. Abaddon sucks.
Black Legion stands are crying right now.
Good. I feed off their tears.
So that kind of leads us into the army rule for Chaos Space Marines. Dark Pacts. Essentially, all it is in your whenever Chaos Space Marine, or a proper keyword is Heretic Astartes unit, is chosen to or selected to shoot or fight, you can make a Dark Pact roll. What this means is that you can pick either lethal hits for, I guess, higher quality attacks, or sustained hits for more attacks. But every time you make a Dark Pact, you have to roll leadership? Yeah, a leadership test. And if you fail, you take D3 mortal wounds.
Basically, if you're lucky, you'll never fail the leadership. But if you're unlucky, you're gonna lose a lot of dudes for doing your dark packs. But they're also kind of necessary to compete with other armies.
Yeah, so on the whole, it's pretty good. Like every unit and every shooting and fight phase gets to get a free keyword for their weapons.
It's just there's a little bit of rebound sometimes.
For typical Chaos Space Marine stuff, if you roll awful, like if you fail your leadership and roll maximum on the mortals, you lose 1.5 Chaos Space Marines, which really isn't that bad.
Yeah, especially when you're running them in groups of 10. Even in groups of 5, that's not that bad when you only get to do it once per round. So it's worth just using it, because if you lose a few Astartes doing it, it probably means the enemy lost more of their own units because of what you did.
So, as you've kind of alluded to, their playstyle is fairly similar to Space Marines. There's a few differences. We'll get into those later for like as far as souping armies. The biggest difference is that they do it, keeping in theme with our psychic versus no psychic. Chaos Space Marines tend to be more psychic because they just have more librarian or psyker units, and also in older editions you could equip like your basic legionnaire squad with a balefire tome that just makes one of your marines a psyker.
And they tend to be slightly more shooting than melee, but they're also a lot more centered up than the Space Marines are, because they have entire units of things, or several entire units of things that are entirely melee focused. So you can run them as either or, but it's good to have a mix. But shooting is still favored because it's kind of just a shooting game right now. Shooting is still better than melee for the most part. Some armies kind of ignore that, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I will say on the whole is, even though we keep making these Space Marine comparisons, technically their weapons hit their typical standard weapons hit less hard, because your standard Space Marine unit right now is the Intercessor, because Firstborn is a thing of the past. Intercessors are equipped with bolt rifles, which are identical.
Aren't they bringing back the Firstborn models?
Not really. They're updating them, but they're not giving them a Firstborn or Primaris keyword anymore. But as far as like tactical squads, pretty much unplayable. But I think that's all we have for Chaos Space Marines. What should we talk about next?
Let's talk about the Death Guard.
Death Guard. All right, very cool.
All right, so Death Guard are slower moving, but they're tougher Astartes. They are a denomination of Chaos Space Marines, but like not in the same way that like non-chapter or non-codex compliant chapters are for normal Space Marines. They're part of the like more separated out factions to the point that they get their entire own codex.
Yeah, so if you remember from our first video or first parts, when you talked about Space Marines, we talked about the difference between Codex Compliant and Diversion chapters.
Yeah, compliant are like your Ultramarines, your Salamanders, your Raven Guard, all the normal Imperial Fist, all the ones like that. But like non-Codex compliant are like your Blood Angels, your Dark Angels. They're not the same thing for new people.
Right. So the point we're getting at is that Diversion chapters can use most of the they get most of the standard Space Marine units, but they get access to their own stuff.
Yeah, and they get some extra rules on top.
And for the other two special warbands, which we're going to be talking about, are sort of like that, but more further, they have access to certain Chaos Space Marine models, but they also have a lot more of their own unique models, and their own army rules.
Yeah, like for instance, their super leader guy with one of the coolest models in the game, Mortarion, can only be run if you're playing Death Guard. CSM cannot run him. I don't think you can run him if you're playing Demons either. I think he has to be run with Death Guard.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's just Death Guard. He's not like
I think so.
technically he's not demon.
He's not a demon, yeah. Even though he kind of is.
Well, yeah, I meant in terms of keywords.
Yeah, so Death Guard's faction rule has to go along with them being all like Nurgly and gross. It's called Nurgle's Gifts. If your army faction is Death Guard, which it is because you're playing Death Guard, while an enemy unit is within something called your contagion range, which is basically it's an aura emanating off of your units that starts at 3 inches from your units on turn 1. On turn 2, it goes up to 5, and on turn 3 and onward, it's at 7 inches out from your units.
If you've ever been to an anime convention, you are very familiar with that contagion range. And if you're not,
weird smell.
Then you're the Nurgle stinky boy.
Yeah, but yeah, if enemy units are within that expanding range that gets bigger throughout the game, they get a -1 to their toughness stat on their basic like stat line for the unit, which makes them easier to wound with all sorts of stuff.
It depends on the unit. Sometimes it won't make a difference, but sometimes it will be the difference between wounding on a 4 and wounding on a 3 or any other.
Yeah, or wounding on a 6 or a 5. And in terms of how they compare up to like standard Chaos Space Marines, they're actually a bit more elite. They run fewer models, but they're generally tankier and they hit harder. They lean a bit more towards melee than they do shooting, but some of their melee absolutely fucks. The only problem is getting them to the enemy to do it, because I don't know if we've stated, they are slower as a trade-off for them being tougher. They're a slow marching advance, but they're very hard to stop once they're started. And they are almost not psychic at all, but they have, I think, they have Mortarion, they have Typhus, and I think they can take the CSM's Psyker?
They might be able to take the sorcerers. I think in the index, the index is literally called like Death Guard Sorcerer or some dumb shit like that.
It's probably like like you take a Chaos Space Marine sorcerer, like I paint him green, now he's a Death Guard one. Yeah, they have their two main psychers are 2 big characters, and both of them fuck in melee and psychic. Sadly, they don't get to cast cool Nurgle Psyker powers anymore because it's 10th edition and not 9th. But it's not as bad for them as it is for the next branching faction. Come on, you go on. say the words.
Thousand Sons.
That was a good transition. You ruined it. Go on.
Yep. All right. Tzeentch's chosen warbands, as it were. The winds of fate of the warp are fickle, and so is Tzeentch, as he has decided that Thousand Sons do not get psychic spells. Sort of.
But they also kind of do. Unlike everyone else in 10th, they do actually kind of get spells.
So Sons are kind of weird because they are a very psychic army. As it is with Tzeentch, they are very psychic. However, a lot of their units actually aren't. Like their main battle line are Rubric Marines, which are not psychic. They also have access to certain demons like Zangors, also not psychic.
Zangors suck. There's too many of them in every box. Get rid of them.
They're the only ones who have the option to actually choose to cast psychic spells. And that takes us into their army rule, Cabal of Sorcerers. Now, we won't go through all of them because it's way too much, but
we can list their names because they sound cool.
On most Thousand Sons data sheets, on their army rule, you'll see Cabal of Sorcerers and then a number. That number is the amount of points that unit generates per turn. You get, so in your command phase or the start of your turn, you take all of the Cabal points you have, and you get to choose certain spells to cast with them. Unfortunately, because Games Workshop decided that Psychic was too stupid, because they're probably Space Marine players, K-Suns only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spells. I don't have a joke. That's just wow, 5. That's not very good.
Even the lesser psychic factions in 9th edition had like 8 spells minimum. I think K-Suns had like a bunch.
So I don't want to repeat myself, but I will because I'm stupid. They are similar. K-Suns are similar to Chaos Space Marines in the sense that they are about equivalent in like how expensive the army is. I think 1,000 Suns get a little more expensive because their dudes are more like psychic and stuff, or they get more like abilities because they're psychic.
Yeah.
They are not they can do melee, but that's not where you want them. You typically
they're not meant for it.
right. They're also not the fastest, and I don't know if we don't really get this in 10th edition, but in earlier editions, 1,000 Suns had a lot of teleport shenanigans, sort of like Grey Knights do now in 10th. They had that in like 9th edition where they weren't fast, but it didn't matter because you could teleport them around everywhere.
And then they could actually cast psychic spells instead of having to be like, oh, I can cast this one this turn.
Yeah, but I still like K-Suns. They're neat.
Also, Magnus is cool.
Bitch to paint. But hey, I'm not a K-Suns player.
Yeah, their paint scheme is kind of iffy.
Did you ever see that video where there's like a speed painting guide? It had a speed paint rubric Marines. And normally a speed paint is like 20, 30 minutes max. This was like 60 minutes.
That's the fastest you can go.
Fast as you can go with like goddamn trim.
Yeah, I would say because like 40% of the entire paint job is trim because they just have so much raised sections on their armor. It's a mess. We have a buddy who knows all about that, or is finding out about it, because he's also trying to do a Helldrake in K-Sun colors, which is also a model with a lot of trim.
I hate Chaos Trim so much.
Also, we should say the psychic powers, just say the names because they're fun. If we wanted to, we could also like allude to what they do.
I guess. So here's a quick
Weaver of Fate.
A really quick rundown of the Cabal points and what you use them for. We have from least expensive to most expensive. We have Weaver of Fates at 2 points that allows you to have a model re-roll a failed saving throw. So we have Temporal Surge for 5 points. In your shooting phase, you can select 1,000 Suns units to make a movement. After they already moved, they just can't charge. For 6 Cabal points, we have Echoes from the Warp, which allows you to select a casting Psyker's unit as the target of a stratagem for 0 command points, even if you've already used the stratagem in that phase. We have Doombolt, 7 Cabal points. This is a good old smite. You select an enemy, and you go mortal wounds. And if you roll bad, you mortal wound yourself. So don't roll low, roll high.
Yeah, it's smite, but slightly stronger. And we don't have smite in this edition anymore, but it's better than it was.
And then we have a whopping 9 Cabal points, Twist of Fate, where you take their balls and you twist them, and you give them testicular torsion.
Basically, you make it so that the enemies can't make armor saves. If they have invuls, they can still do it, but like if you're just dealing with like standard Space Marines or normal units that aren't all weird and psychery, it's like, you can't save from anything I just shot you with. Fuck you. But it's 9 points, so it's expensive. So later in the game, you probably won't be able to do it because most of your models that generate these points will be dead. Unless you're doing really well.
Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say for K-Suns, unless you have anything else to add.
I think it's funny that they're less psychic than Grey Knights, but actually have psychic powers.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's kind of fucked up.
I was looking at the 9th edition rules for Grey Knights, and like the standard units like Strike Squad or Terminators only get access to 1 spell, and they don't even get to pick the spell. They don't get access to Smite.
They don't get access to Smite? That does suck.
They get access to, like, I think it's called Hammer Hand, which basically just makes them hit harder.
Well, it just adds more to like the damage characteristic or something, or make.
I do hope in future editions my Terminators can cast Smite.
My 3 squads of Terminators all cast Smite. Warp Surge.
All right, well, I guess we might as well finish out with the last of the Special Snowflake Marines. We're gonna finish off these guys with the World Eaters.
You've been talking a lot about the World Eaters recently. Let's see what you have to say about them.
I just think they're neat. At some point, I want to start a World Eaters army where I paint them in their pre-heresy colors, but then I just splatter blood all over them.
I think they're neat too, but I also think it's funny because you used to not fucking like them. Would you run Angron, or is your hate for Angron too much?
I'm not super big on Angron, but like probably eventually, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, you got to bring either Angron or Karn.
I'll bring Karn.
Or you could just bring both.
At least I'll bring Karn.
I would say Karn's kind of the go-to.
So, World Eaters, Khorne's angry boys. They're angry. That's pretty much all they are. Is angry.
Why don't we do this one backwards? We should start with like how they play and then go to the army rule to kind of show off what they're like.
So, World Eaters are a very, very straightforward army. I actually don't know if there's an army easier to understand than these.
They run up and they smack you in the face.
They are about as elite as typical Space Marines go. The only shooting they have is some of their characters have like a pistol. I think their Jackals have auto guns and stuff, but who cares about them?
And Karn has a plasma, I think.
Karn does have a plasma pistol. But World Leaders are range, cringe, psychic, cringe, run in and beat shit up with a bat, based.
Oh, it's chain axe, but yeah.
I'm just saying, if you gave Karn a bat, I'm pretty sure he'd go to town.
I still love the story of Angron making one of his current weapons. It's so stupid, but it's funny.
So, without getting too much into the lore, Khorne is a very straightforward guy. He's not like, he doesn't like
martial combat.
He likes martial combat. He's not really into like trickery and stuff. Tzeentch is super into scheming and random shits. So why the fuck do World Eaters get a pachinko machine for their army rule? Why the fuck, as a World Eaters player, do you gamble?
Because gambling is fun. 99% of gamblers quit right before they win big.
Why don't the Thousand Sons gamble?
Because they have to. Their army rule has to let them cast psychic powers. Because they get to be the only special psychic people that get to cast psychic powers.
You get to roll to cast psychic spells. So without blue balling you guys anymore, the World Eaters army rule is called Blessings of Khorne. At the start of the turn or the battle rounds, you roll 8d6. I'm not going into what you can do with them, but you roll 8d6, and depending on the results you get, you can do different effects. This ranges from just moving a little bit more. I think it goes as far as like you can put a keyword on your weapons to resurrecting Angry Ron if you roll. I think it's like triple sixes.
I think so, yeah.
It's a fine rule. It's not bad. I just hate that it's with World Eaters and not Thousand Sons. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I just feel like they were so focused on making Thousand Sons, the Psyker Chaos Space Marines, be as psychery as they can be, because they're still more psychery than everyone else, because they can still cast spells, unlike everyone else who's like Psychic Blast.
And you can choose the spells.
Yeah, and you can choose what spells you do, unlike every other faction in 10th who's just like, oh, I have this Psyker, but he just casts Psychic Flamethrower. Woo!
Yeah, it's not great. It's not good.
Yeah, I think that's what they got kind of stuck on with fucking K-Suns, is they were so worried about them not being psychery enough that people would throw a fit, so all they gave them was psychic powers back, while everyone else just doesn't get jacked.
You know what I realized? I realized I was thinking about the psychic phase in 10th, is in the edition where they got rid of the psychic phase, they introduced a Space Marine psychic model as like the main, like, wow, look at this, how crazy this is. And then you get like the Neuro Tyrant for Tyranids. It's just,
yeah, and then like, ha, no more psychic powers. You got Flamethrower. Ha.
I feel like it's just it kind of goes to show the lack of communication between GW's departments, between like the people making the models and the advertising and the people making the rules.
Yeah, but hey, if it works, I guess it works. I guess maybe in 11th they'll fucking bring back the psychic phase, because I think 10th they were just trying to simplify things.
I don't even want to think about 11 editions of Warhammer.
It's gonna be in like 6 years. Don't worry about it.
6 years, probably like 2. Let's be real here.
No, it can't be 2. 9th edition lasted like 6 years.
No, it didn't.
Was it only 4?
Something like that, yeah. It started at the end of 2020.
Shit, it did.
I think the first codex was Space Marines in October.
Man, fuck that. why are they moving so fast? There was nothing wrong with 9th edition, except for all the things wrong with 9th edition. 10th has some more issues with it, but at least it's kind of more balanced.
What's wrong? Nothing was wrong with 9th edition, except for they couldn't decide if Iron Hands were hot garbage or super overpowered.
And then they ended up with it being on super overpowered, like, at the end of every edition.
I can't wait for 10th. Or the end of 10th.
Yeah, when Iron Hands are just top of the leaderboard again.
They just randomly give dreadnoughts like +5 wounds.
Jesus. The end of ninth was awful for anyone who wasn't playing Space Marine.
Enough about Space Marines. Space Marines are cringe. We don't play. None of us here play Space Marines. Let's talk about something cooler.
Bullshit! You play Space Marines. You shut
Let's talk
up.
about something cooler.
You can't act like you don't simp for Space Marines.
Demons, Chaos Demons. So when we ended our Imperium part, we ended with Knights, the Imperial Knights, and Agents of the Imperium because they were designed to be supplementary. You could soup them into pre-existing armies. It's sort of similar here. The difference is that Demons and Chaos Knights are both their own separate factions, so you could run purely as them. So with Chaos Demons, they're kind of hard to categorize because the army is comprised of demon models from the 4 Chaos Guides: Slanesh, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Khorne. Each like god demon plays very differently. So it gets kind of weird with like, well, are they more this, they more that? But generally speaking, demons as a whole tend to be more on the horde side. They're typically more melee focused. I think the only real range they have is from the Tzeentch models. I think Nurgle might have a little bit, and so does Slanesh, but
yeah, and it's psychic shooting at that.
From like going,
like Nurgle might have like that mortar. That's technically a Chaos Demon model.
I think going through my knowledge of demon models, it's only really Tzeentch that shoots. And Tzeentch is pretty much their only source of psychers. None of the other demons really have any. So because of that, how your demon army plays heavily depends on what you buy. If you are interested in, you can choose any 1, 2, 3, or even all 4 Chaos Gods, and it will drastically affect how your army plays.
Technically, there's like 5 ways you could play this army, because you could do each of the Chaos Gods, or you can do Chaos Undivided, which is it's the way that's picked, because it kind of just doesn't work to play one god.
The way we described the 3 like Chaos Gods, Chaos Space Marines, as it were, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Khorne, the way those armies played reflects to how their gods' demons play. So Nurgle, typically way tankier, very slow, and goes into melee. Khorne, is all about running into melee and getting in there. Tzeentch, shooty, psychic, blah 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 blah. Slanesh, who we don't have Slanesh because
So we didn't talk about Slanesh because Emperor's Children aren't worth their own codex because they're bad. Fuck you, Fulgrim.
Emperor's Children don't have their own codex, and hopefully
fuck
they
you,
never
Fulgrim.
will.
Also, fuck you, Lucius. Yeah, I hate Lucius more than Fulgrim. He's a piece of shit. His lore's bad.
Slanesh are sort of like
really fast, but they're really weak.
Right, they're like Khorne in the sense that they want to get into melee, but they're way faster and they're way weaker.
They die faster. They're like Eldar of demons, which is funny because
I was gonna say we'll talk about that in the Xenos episode, but I didn't think about how the Eldar birthed Chaos God plays like Eldar.
Well, that's something I've thought about before too. Is that was actually a really good translation.
Something else to say. If you were interested in playing Chaos Demons in 40k,
use Be'lakor. Be'lakor's cool as fuck.
That, but also the way demons work in Warhammer is most demon models exist in both 40k and Games Workshop Fantasy version, Age of Sigmar.
That is true. Or at least all 40k demon models work in Sigmar, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
But not all Sigmar models work in 40k. In fact, Sigmar has a lot cooler demon models that we don't get access to in 40k, which is bullshit.
If you are playing Chaos Demons, you also have an Age of Sigmar army. However, what I will say as a sort of caveat is Chaos Demons are Chaos Demons. They don't have you can run all Khorne, all Tzeentch, etc., but it's not like their own separate army. Whereas in Age of Sigmar, they are. Each Chaos God has its own army rules of demons. Speaking of army rules, we should probably talk about that.
Yeah.
Demons are interesting. They have what's called the Shadow of Chaos. Basically, as the game goes on and certain conditions are met, parts of the battlefield become within your Shadow of Chaos zone. Your deployment zone is always within your Shadow of Chaos. If you can, at the start of a phase, if you control at least half of the objective markers of No Man's Land becomes Shadow of Chaos, and if you control half of the markers in your opponent's deployment zone, then their deployment zone becomes Shadow of Chaos. What the Shadow of Chaos does is, if you have a demon unit within your Shadow of Chaos zone, I'm just going to call it the Shadow Zone.
You go into the Shadow Realm.
Call it the Shadow Realm. If you have a unit within the Shadow Realm, you can, whenever you take a Battle Shock test, you add 1 to the test, and if you pass it, you can regain up to lost wounds, including models. They also have what's called Demonic Terror, which is the opposite of that for your opponents inside of your Shadow Realm.
Yeah, so -1 to their Battle Shock tests, and if they fail, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. Basically, if Chaos Demons get going and get like full map control, the enemy is kind of fucked. It's kind of swingy, because if you just can't get on the points early enough in the game, the rule doesn't really do much for you. But if you can get stuff onto points and then keep them, your enemy's going to have a lot harder time taking them from you and just existing, especially if you can get every portion of the map to be under the shadow, because then they can't even sit in their own spawn and camp there without getting debuffs. Which is why you kind of want to bring a few Slanesh units so they can get out really fast into the No Man's Land objectives. That's kind of their only purpose right now. Get there faster than the other guy.
Yep, and I suppose it's only right we end Chaos where we ended the Imperium, talking about Chaos Knights. So I don't want to repeat myself as much as I keep saying I don't want to repeat myself when I do. That's just the way Chaos is. You keep repeating yourself.
It's a lot of the same, but different.
Instead of walking the same ground, I would want to run it, get it through quicker. Chaos Knights are a big robot.
Hyper elite. More shoot than melee, but they can melee too, and no psychic in this edition.
Actually, they might.
Actually, no, they do have a little bit of psychic. I believe their solo model is a psyker.
Yes.
I don't remember which one it is. Is it?
I
it's
think
the one with the tentacle arms. Yeah, I think so.
If it's the
one Look at GW reusing the fucking names that they already picked for GSC bastards.
To go through Knights quickly, they are big, stompy robots that you can run either as their own faction or scooped in a unit. Oh shit! Wait, we didn't talk. Did you talk about? We didn't talk about demons stooping into.
Oh shit! We didn't mention it. Fuck it, we can just talk about it now because we're already talking about sticking knights into stuff.
Yeah. So speaking of stooping, stooping, I'll talk about Chaos Knights first. So Chaos Knights I think it works the same way Imperial Knights does. You can have 1 big knight model or 3 war dogs into an army,
which are their chaos armatures, basically.
Exactly.
Which are like small.
Demons, we forgot to mention this also because we mentioned they soup, but we didn't really get into it. For Chaos Space Marines, they can just go into any army. Like a certain percentage of your army can be Chaos Demons. Doesn't really matter.
I think it's 500 points.
Yes.
That's usually the rule, yeah.
For the Chaos God specific Chaos Space Marines, you're limited to the demons you can take. So for Death Guard, you can only take Nurgle demons. K-Suns can only take Zinch models. Khorne can only take, or World Leaders can only take Khorne demons. And even though they aren't their own faction, if your warlord is Lucius the Eternal, which is Emperor's Children, you can take only Slanesh models.
Yeah. Also, fuck Lucius the Eternal.
Fuck Lucius the Eternal. I'll never stop saying it. So back to Chaos Knights.
Big stompy robot.
Yeah, the big stompy robots. Their army rule is called Harbingers of Dread. From the first battle round onwards, they get an aura within all of their knights that's 12 inches, and any battle shock or leadership test taken for an enemy unit within their aura has to subtract 1. Then starting from...
Make it a little bit harder for them to not get battle shocked or do a leadership.
Exactly. Starting from the 3rd battle round onwards, they get another ability called Doom and Darkness, where every time you attack a model,
if it's battle shocked,
you add 1 to the win roll. and each time an enemy unit that is battle shocked attacks you, they subtract 1 from the hit roll. So you hit them easier and they hit you harder.
Yeah, and both of these effects get to work at the same time because it's just battle round 1 onward and battle round 3 onward. So it is kind of cool. They do just get stronger throughout the game.
So so just to like lay it out, in battle round 3, 4, and 5, you have the Despair aura, and then you have the Doom and Darkness abilities, which are not auras, just so that no one gets confused. Because I know some people get weird.
Doom and Darkness specifically is made entirely to build off of your Despair aura, which you get from the beginning of the game on, because you get benefits from them being battle shocked, well, near you. It's kind of cool. I don't know if I like it more than the Imperial Knights standard rule, though. I kind of like that the Imperial Knights one is like you go and do this quest and you get a buff, but also like it kind of limits what you can do for the battle.
I think with Knights, Chaos Knights, it's more consistent and it's just like a flat out good buff.
It's just a buff.
Whereas Imperial Knights their army rule is fun for the flavor of it. Kind of like how Chaos Space Marines with their dark packs.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I think that's about all we have to say in terms of the Chaos armies available in 40K Tabletop. Unless you have anything else you want to add.
Buy our merch.
Maybe one more fuck Lucius. Buy the merch we don't have. Think about buying our merch.
Your shit from us. Just whatever you wanted to say, it says it. Fuck Lucius.
Fuck Lucius. Fuck you, Fulgrim, too, but Lucius is actually written worse. Rylanor is better than the rest of the Emperor's Children, and I think that's about it. That ends our part 2 episode for this mini-series. Next episode, we will be talking about Xenos. That will be our 3rd part and final part to this mini-series. Have a good one.